Deep beneath the Swiss Alps, something impossible just happened. Inside a hidden laboratory, physicists watched their instruments register a number that should not exist. They recalibrated, ran the experiment again and again, yet the result never changed. What they had found threatened to rewrite the fundamental laws of reality. But here's the unsettling part. This phenomenon wasn't new. It had been happening all around us in nature for billions of years. We just never knew where to look. Now that we've finally seen it, we can't unsee it. This isn't about whether faster than light travel is possible anymore. The real question is far more disturbing. Why did the universe hide this ability from us for so long? And what happens now that we've found it? The answer doesn't begin with advanced technology or alien science, but with an observation so simple it was dismissed as a joke, until the mathematics proved it was real, and by then everything had already changed. Get ready, we begin now. Chapter 1. The Impossible Observation. The story actually starts 17 months ago in a university laboratory in Melbourne, Australia. Dr. Sarah Chen wasn't looking for a revolution in physics that Tuesday morning. She was studying something far more mundane: quantum entanglement decay rates in synthetic crystals. It was thesis work, routine measurements, the kind of experiments that rarely make headlines. But that morning, her graduate student noticed something peculiar in the overnight data logs. Two entangled particles in their experimental setup had maintained their quantum correlation far longer than they should have. Not by a small margin, not by a percentage point or two. They had maintained entanglement for 17 times longer than the theoretical maximum. 17 times. Chen's first instinct was equipment failure. Her second was human error. Her third was that her graduate student had somehow contaminated the sample. But when they ran the experiment again, this time with Chen monitoring every single parameter personally, the results were even more dramatic. The particles weren't just maintaining entanglement longer than they should. They were communicating faster than the speed of light. Significantly faster. And the truly bizarre part, the detail that would eventually crack open this entire mystery, was that the communication speed increased proportionally with the distance between the particles. The farther apart they moved the entangled particles, the faster the information seemed to travel between them. This violated not one but three fundamental principles of quantum mechanics. It contradicted Einstein's theory of special relativity. It made absolutely no sense whatsoever according to any model of physics we currently possess. Chen did what any responsible scientist would do. She buried the results. She assumed her equipment was faulty, her methodology was flawed, or she was missing some obvious confounding variable. She didn't publish. She didn't even tell her department head. She simply archived the data and moved on to other experiments. That decision, that moment of scientific caution, would haunt her for months afterward. Because while Chen was quietly shelving her impossible results, 3 other laboratories on 3 different continents were observing the exact same phenomenon. A team in Singapore, another in Germany, a third at MIT, all of them studying different aspects of quantum mechanics. None of them aware of what the others were seeing, all of them observing the same impossible thing: quantum correlations that got stronger and faster with distance, not weaker. Entanglement that didn't decay. Information that travelled faster than light should allow. But here's where the story takes its first truly strange turn. Here's where we encounter the detail that makes everything that comes after feel less like science and more like cosmic conspiracy. None of these scientists reported their findings publicly, not one. They all independently decided to keep quiet about what they'd observed. Think about that for a moment. 4 separate research teams, operating in complete isolation from each other, all witnessed the same revolutionary phenomenon, all of them capable of making career-defining announcements, and all of them choose silence. Why? The official answer, the one they'll give you now if you ask, is scientific caution. They wanted to be certain. They needed to eliminate all possible sources of error. They didn't want to make extraordinary claims without extraordinary evidence. But there's another explanation. One that's harder to prove but impossible to ignore once you understand what they'd actually discovered. Every single one of these researchers, when they first saw their results, experienced the same instinctive reaction. Not excitement, not curiosity, not even confusion. Fear. A deep, inexplicable sense of dread that something fundamental about reality had just shifted beneath their feet. Dr. Chen described it years later in an interview as the sensation that I'd opened a door that was meant to stay closed. The researcher in Singapore said he felt like I'd accidentally stumbled into a room I wasn't supposed to enter. Different words, same sentiment. They'd all touched something that felt forbidden. And here's what makes this genuinely unsettling. When physicists eventually analysed the psychological responses of these early researchers, they found something remarkable. The fear response appeared before conscious understanding of the results. Their bodies reacted to the data before their minds had fully processed what they were seeing. Some primal part of their nervous system recognized the significance of these measurements before their rational brain could articulate why it mattered. As if some deep evolutionary instinct was warning them, this knowledge is dangerous. Now you might be thinking this sounds like pseudoscience, like mystical nonsense dressed up in lab coats, but the autonomic responses were measurable. Heart rate increases, cortisol spikes, pupil dilation, all documented in the laboratory security footage that was later reviewed. These were objective physiological reactions to abstract numerical data, and they occurred across 4 different researchers who had no contact with each other, working in 4 different cultural contexts, studying 4 different experimental setups. The only common variable was the data itself, the impossible measurements, the numbers that suggested something was very, very wrong with our understanding of how the universe operates. Chapter 2. The pattern emerges. It took 8 months for these researchers to finally connect with each other. 8 months of independent verification, of double-checking equipment, of running variations on their experiments. And during those 8 months, something else was happening in the broader physics community. Something that would eventually reveal just how widespread this phenomenon actually was. Papers began appearing in quantum mechanics journals about anomalous results, unexplained data points, measurements that didn't quite fit existing models. None of these papers explicitly claimed to have broken the laws of physics. They were careful, cautious. They presented their findings as curiosities, as puzzles that needed solving, as suggestions that perhaps our measurement techniques needed refinement. But if you knew what to look for, if you understood the subtext, a pattern emerged. Dozens of research teams around the world were all encountering the same fundamental impossibility. They just weren't saying it out loud. The breakthrough came at a quantum computing conference in Stockholm. Dr. Chen was presenting unrelated research when she noticed something in another physicist's poster presentation. A graph showing entanglement persistence times that looked eerily familiar. She approached the researcher, a Japanese physicist named Dr. Kenji Yamamoto, and asked a carefully worded question about his measurement protocols. His response told her everything she needed to know. He'd seen it too. The impossible correlation, the faster-than-light communication, the phenomenon that shouldn't exist. Within 48 hours, Chen and Yamamoto had identified 11 other researchers at the same conference who had observed similar anomalies. 11. At a single conference with maybe 300 attendees. The implications were staggering. If this sampling was representative, if even a fraction of quantum mechanics researchers worldwide were encountering this phenomenon, then we weren't talking about isolated equipment failures or rare edge cases. We were talking about a fundamental aspect of quantum mechanics that had somehow been hiding in plain sight for decades. They formed a working group, shared their data under strict confidentiality agreements, and that's when the real pattern emerged, the pattern that would ultimately lead to the breakthrough we're discussing today. Every single experiment that had produced these anomalous results shared one specific characteristic. A characteristic so obvious in retrospect that it seemed impossible no one had noticed it before. But sometimes the most important details are the ones we overlook precisely because they seem too simple to matter. The common factor wasn't the type of particles they were studying. It wasn't the laboratory equipment they were using. It wasn't even the specific quantum properties they were measuring. The common factor was geometric. All of these experiments, without exception, had arranged their quantum systems in a very specific spatial configuration. A configuration that most physicists considered arbitrary, meaningless. A simple convenience of laboratory setup that shouldn't have any bearing on the fundamental physics involved. They had all, without realizing it, oriented their experimental apparatus in a particular alignment relative to the galactic plane. Not perfectly aligned, not precisely calculated, but close enough. Close enough that when they later mapped all the laboratory positions and orientations on a galactic coordinate system, a clear pattern emerged. The anomalous results clustered along specific vectors, specific directions in space relative to our galaxy's rotation and structure. This discovery opened up a question that no one wanted to ask out loud, because asking it meant confronting a possibility that seemed to belong more to science fiction than to legitimate physics. If the direction in space matters, if quantum entanglement behaves differently depending on which way you point your experiment relative to the galaxy, then what exactly is out there in the universe that's creating this directional dependency? What property of space itself, what feature of the cosmic landscape could possibly produce this effect? The easy answer, the comfortable answer, would be some kind of local gravitational anomaly. Some quirk of Earth's position in the galaxy creating measurement artifacts. But the data didn't support that interpretation. The effect wasn't local. It wasn't even limited to our region of space. Because around this same time, astronomers analyzing data from quantum communication experiments conducted on the International Space Station noticed something remarkable. The same anomalies, the same impossible correlations. And when they adjusted for the station's constantly changing orientation as it orbited Earth, they found the same directional dependency, the same alignment with the galactic coordinate system. Whatever was causing this effect, it wasn't confined to Earth. It wasn't limited to any specific region of space. It was a fundamental property of the universe itself, a property that appeared to be built into the fabric of space-time. And that realization led to a hypothesis so radical, so completely unprecedented, that even the scientists proposing it could barely believe what they were suggesting. Chapter 3. The Breakthrough Hypothesis. Dr. Michael Torres, a theoretical physicist from Barcelona who had joined Chen's working group, was the first to articulate the hypothesis in mathematical terms. He proposed that space-time itself isn't uniform. Not in the way we've always assumed. We've known for a century that space-time can be curved by mass and energy. That's just general relativity. Einstein's great insight. But Torres was suggesting something fundamentally different. He was proposing that space-time has a grain, a directional structure, like wood. Think about that metaphor for a moment because it's crucial to understanding everything that follows. When you look at a plank of wood, it appears smooth and continuous. But if you examine it closely, you see grain patterns, directions along which the fibers align. And if you try to cut or split the wood, you'll find it's much easier to work along the grain than against it. The wood isn't uniform, its internal structure has preferred directions. Torres was suggesting that the vacuum of space, the supposedly empty nothingness between particles, might have a similar structure. Now, this wasn't a completely new idea. Various physicists over the years had proposed that space-time might have discrete or quantum properties at the smallest scales. But Torres was taking it further. He was suggesting that this structure, this grain of space-time, was oriented, aligned. That the universe had grown, expanded, and evolved in ways that left directional imprints in the very fabric of reality itself. And more importantly, he was suggesting that quantum particles could sense this structure, that they could in effect feel which way the grain runs. The mathematics were elegant, almost too elegant. Torres built on existing frameworks from quantum field theory and general relativity, but he introduced a new tensor field that described the orientation of space-time structure. He called it the cosmological grain field. And when he plugged the parameters of this field into the equations governing quantum entanglement, something remarkable happened. The equations predicted exactly the anomalous behavior that Chen and the other researchers had observed. The faster-than-light correlations, the directional dependence, the increasing speed with distance. All of it fell out naturally from the mathematics. But predictions are one thing. Experimental confirmation is another. The working group needed to test Torres's hypothesis in a controlled, systematic way. They needed to design an experiment that would definitively prove or disprove the existence of this cosmological grain field. And more importantly, they needed to understand what this grain structure actually meant for physics. Because if Torres was right, if space-time really did have this directional property, then the implications went far beyond faster-than-light communication. The experiment they designed was deceptively simple. They would create pairs of entangled particles and measure the correlation strength as they varied both the distance between particles and the orientation of the measurement apparatus relative to the galactic coordinate system. Simple in concept, brutally difficult in execution. They needed to coordinate measurements across multiple continents on platforms that could be precisely oriented in space, with timing accuracy measured in picoseconds. It took 6 months to set up. They used particle accelerators in Switzerland, Japan, and the United States. They coordinated with quantum communication satellites. They recruited over 40 research institutions to participate in what became the largest coordinated quantum mechanics experiment in history. And they kept it quiet. No press releases, no preliminary announcements, just a technical note in a physics journal describing a multi-site quantum correlation study. Innocuous, boring, the kind of paper that most people scroll past without reading. The experiment ran for 72 continuous hours, generating and measuring millions of entangled particle pairs, recording precise data about correlation strengths, communication speeds, and spatial orientations. The data analysis took 3 weeks. 3 weeks during which the physics community had no idea that everything they thought they knew about the universe was about to change. And then, on a Thursday morning in March, the working group released their findings simultaneously on 3 preprint servers. The paper was titled Observational Evidence for Anisotropic Quantum Correlation Propagation and Implications for Spacetime Structure. Dry. Technical. The kind of title that sounds boring even to physicists. But the content was explosive. They had confirmed Torres's hypothesis. Spacetime did have a grain, a directional structure, and quantum entanglement, that mysterious correlation between particles, didn't respect the speed of light limit when it aligned with this structure. When particles were oriented along the grain of spacetime, information could propagate between them at speeds that were not just faster than light. They were potentially instantaneous. No delay at all. 0 time lag across any distance. But that wasn't even the most shocking part of their findings. That wasn't what made theoretical physicists around the world suddenly stop what they were doing and start frantically running calculations. The truly revolutionary discovery was buried in an appendix, a mathematical proof showing that if spacetime had this grain structure, if it had these preferred directions, then there should be corresponding directions where normal physics broke down entirely. Directions where the usual laws governing matter and energy simply didn't apply. And according to their calculations, these directions were accessible, reachable. You just had to know how to align your trajectory with the grain. Chapter 4. The Theoretical Revolution. The physics community's reaction was immediate and divided. Half of all physicists declared the results impossible. Artifacts of measurement error. Misinterpretation of statistical noise. The other half began frantically trying to replicate the experiments or extend the theory. Within 2 weeks, 17 different research groups had confirmed the basic findings. The directional dependency was real. The faster-than-light correlations were genuine. Whatever these researchers had discovered, it wasn't going away. But confirming the observation was just the beginning. Understanding what it meant, what it implied about the fundamental nature of reality, that required a complete rethinking of modern physics. And that's where Dr. Lisa Park entered the story. Park was a mathematical physicist at Cambridge, known for her work connecting seemingly unrelated areas of theoretical physics. When she read the working group's paper, she immediately recognized something that others had missed. The grain structure of spacetime that Torres had described mathematically was eerily similar to certain solutions in string theory. String theory, for those unfamiliar, is a framework that attempts to unify quantum mechanics and gravity by proposing that fundamental particles are actually tiny vibrating strings. It's elegant mathematics, but notoriously difficult to test experimentally. Most physicists treat it as interesting speculation rather than proven fact, but Park noticed that in certain string theory models, particularly those involving compactified extra dimensions, you naturally get directional structures in space-time. The mathematics predicted it. The theory required it. But no one had thought to look for experimental evidence because no one expected these structures to be detectable at macroscopic scales. Park spent 3 days locked in her office working through the calculations. When she emerged, she had connected Torres's cosmological grain field to a specific class of string theory models, and the implications were staggering. If her interpretation was correct, then the grain of space-time wasn't just some abstract mathematical property. It was the shadow, the projection into our four-dimensional universe of the geometry of extra dimensions. Dimensions beyond the three of space and one of time that we directly experience. Dimensions that string theory had predicted, but that most physicists assumed were either non-existent or forever beyond our ability to detect. This connection to string theory did something remarkable. It transformed the discovery from an isolated anomaly into a piece of a much larger puzzle. Suddenly, decades of theoretical work that had seemed purely abstract became potentially relevant to understanding this new phenomenon. The mathematics of higher dimensional geometry, the topology of compactified spaces, the way vibrating strings in 10 or 11 dimensions could produce the particles and forces we observe in our four-dimensional reality. All of it might be connected to understanding how to navigate the grain of space-time. But here's where the story takes another unexpected turn. While physicists were debating string theory and extra dimensions, a completely different group of scientists made a discovery that would prove even more important. Astrobiologists studying extremophile bacteria in deep-sea thermal vents noticed something strange. These organisms, living in one of Earth's most hostile environments, had evolved a peculiar cellular structure. Their cell membranes contained crystalline inclusions that seemed to serve no obvious biological function. These crystals didn't help with energy metabolism. They didn't play any role in reproduction or environmental sensing that anyone could identify. They were just there, taking up space, using resources to build and maintain despite apparently contributing nothing to the organism's survival. Dr. Rebecca Foster, the microbiologist leading the study, was curious. Evolution doesn't waste energy on useless structures. If these bacteria were investing resources into building these crystals, there had to be a reason. She began a detailed analysis of the crystal structure and composition. What she found was shocking. The crystals were arranged in a very specific geometric pattern, a pattern that matched with remarkable precision the directional alignments that quantum physicists were discovering in their space-time grain experiments. This couldn't be coincidence. Could it? Bacteria that evolved billions of years ago in complete isolation from modern physics laboratories had somehow developed structures aligned with fundamental properties of space-time that human scientists had just discovered. Foster reached out to Chen's working group, shared her findings, and together they began to explore a possibility that seemed almost too strange to consider. What if life itself had evolved to sense and utilize the grain of space-time? What if these bacteria and potentially other organisms had developed biological mechanisms to interact with this fundamental structure of reality, not through conscious understanding, not through technological manipulation, but through pure evolutionary adaptation over billions of years? Natural selection favoring organisms that could somehow tap into properties of space-time that modern physics had only just begun to understand. They tested this hypothesis by examining other extremophile organisms, bacteria living in ice, in acid pools, in radiation-saturated environments, and they found the same crystalline structures, the same geometric alignments, different species, different evolutionary lineages, but the same basic adaptation. as if the grain of space-time was such a fundamental feature of the environment that life had independently discovered how to sense it multiple times over evolutionary history. Chapter 5. The biological connection. The next question was obvious. Do these crystals actually do anything? Can these organisms somehow use their alignment with space-time grain to gain some evolutionary advantage? The experiments to answer this question took months. Careful observation of bacterial behavior under various conditions. Genetic modification to disrupt crystal formation. Comparison of survival rates and metabolic efficiency between organisms with and without these structures. The results were subtle but significant. Bacteria with properly formed space-time aligned crystals showed slightly improved chemical sensing abilities, not by enhancing their existing sensor proteins, but by somehow detecting chemical gradients across distances that shouldn't be possible given the diffusion rates in their environment. It was as if they were sensing molecular concentrations at locations slightly displaced from their physical position, getting information from nearby regions of space through some kind of quantum correlation mechanism. This discovery fundamentally changed the conversation. Suddenly, faster-than-light communication wasn't just an abstract physics phenomenon. It was something life had figured out how to do billions of years ago at the microscopic scale. The implications cascaded through multiple fields simultaneously. Biologists began re-examining cellular structures across all domains of life. Physicists started thinking about biological systems as natural quantum computers that had evolved to exploit space-time properties. Engineers began asking whether we could build artificial systems that mimicked these biological mechanisms. But the most important question came from an unexpected source. A neurobiologist named Dr. James Patterson asked whether similar structures might exist in human neurons. If bacteria had evolved to sense space-time grain, what about more complex organisms? What about us? Patterson secured funding to look for crystalline structures in preserved brain tissue. What he found sent shockwaves through both neuroscience and physics communities. Human neurons contain microtubules. These are cylindrical protein structures that serve various cellular functions, primarily related to maintaining cell shape and transporting materials. But when Patterson examined these microtubules using techniques borrowed from the bacteria studies, he found something remarkable. The microtubules contained regular geometric patterns of electron distributions that aligned with space-time grain orientations. Not in all neurons, not even in most, but in specific types of neurons located in particular brain regions associated with spatial awareness and navigation. This raised a disturbing possibility, one that Patterson was initially reluctant to even articulate publicly. What if human consciousness itself was somehow related to our brain's ability to interact with space-time grain? What if our subjective experience of being, our sense of existing as observers, separate from the observed universe, was tied to quantum correlations propagating along these preferred directions in reality's structure? It sounds like mysticism, like the kind of quantum consciousness theories that serious scientists usually dismiss as pseudoscience. But the evidence was there, measurable, reproducible. Human brains contain structures aligned with fundamental space-time geometry, and those structures were concentrated in regions associated with our sense of self and our awareness of space. While biologists were exploring the connection between life and space-time structure, engineers were asking a more practical question. If we understand how this grain works, if we know that information can propagate faster than light along certain directions, can we build technology that exploits this? Can we engineer systems that deliberately align with space-time grain to achieve faster-than-light communication or even travel? The first attempts were crude. Simple experiments trying to send information between entangled particles while carefully controlling their orientation. These early tests confirmed that yes, you could deliberately engineer quantum systems to maximize faster-than-light correlation speeds. By aligning your apparatus with space-time grain, you could achieve communication rates that were effectively instantaneous across any distance. But there was a problem, a significant problem that nobody had anticipated. The information capacity was extremely limited. You could send signals faster than light, but only very simple signals. Binary states, yes or no, on or off. Trying to send more complex information resulted in immediate decoherence. The quantum states collapsed. The system failed. It was as if the universe itself was limiting how much information could propagate through these faster-than-light channels. Engineers called it the bandwidth problem. No matter how sophisticated their equipment became, no matter how carefully they aligned their systems, they couldn't push more than a few bits per second through the faster-than-light channel. This limitation seemed to doom any hope of practical applications. Instantaneous communication sounds revolutionary until you realize you can only send yes-no signals, and forget about faster-than-light travel. Moving matter, not just information, through these channels seemed completely impossible. Matter has mass, momentum, complex internal structure, all of which would need to be preserved during any kind of transport. The quantum mechanisms they discovered could barely handle transmitting a single bit of information. Transporting a particle, let alone a spacecraft, was laughable. Except there was something strange about the bandwidth limitation. Dr. Torres, who had continued working on the theoretical mathematics, noticed that the information capacity wasn't actually constant. It varied depending on the specific alignment with space-time grain. Most directions gave you the few bits per second that engineers were struggling with. But Torres's calculations suggested that there should be very specific, very precisely defined directions where the bandwidth increased dramatically, exponentially. Along these special trajectories, which he called grain channels, the mathematics predicted you could transmit enormous amounts of information, potentially unlimited amounts, all faster than light. Chapter 6. The grain channels. Finding these grain channels became the next great challenge. Torres's equations described them mathematically, but didn't provide a simple recipe for locating them in physical space. They weren't fixed directions. They moved, shifted, changed orientation based on the local structure of space-time, which itself varied depending on mass distribution, gravitational fields, and even quantum fluctuations at the smallest scales. Locating a grain channel required solving incredibly complex differential equations in real time, accounting for the constantly changing geometry of space around you. A team of computer scientists and physicists at MIT developed the first grain channel navigation algorithm. It was computational brute force, massive parallel processing, constantly calculating the local space-time geometry and searching for the trajectories that maximized information propagation speed. The first successful test came 9 months after Torres published his grain channel theory. They managed to locate a channel connecting their laboratory in Massachusetts with a partner laboratory in California. And when they transmitted a signal through it, the bandwidth was extraordinary. Gigabits per second. Instantaneous across 3,000 miles. No light speed delay. No signal degradation. But here's what made this achievement both thrilling and deeply unsettling. The grain channel they'd found didn't run in a straight line between Massachusetts and California. It couldn't. Space-time grain doesn't align with our human concepts of geometric straight lines. The channel twisted through space following the grain structure. And when they mapped its path using their navigation algorithms, they realized something profound. The channel passed through regions where, according to conventional physics, it shouldn't be possible for anything to exist. Let me explain what that means. In normal physics, space is space. Empty space is just empty. Vacuum. Nothing there. But grain channels revealed that this intuition was wrong. When you look at space-time at the resolution necessary to see grain structure, you find that so-called empty space has texture, complexity, regions where the grain aligns in ways that create what the physicists started calling structural singularities, points or lines or surfaces in space where the normal rules of physics break down not because of extreme mass or energy, but because of the pure geometry of space-time itself. The grain channel between Massachusetts and California passed through 3 of these structural singularities. And the really bizarre part was that information traveling through the channel seemed to spend no time in these regions. Zero duration. It entered a singularity at one point and exited at another point, potentially millions of miles away, with no elapsed time in between. Not faster than light travel, something weirder, something that suggested the grain channels were creating shortcuts through space itself. Wormholes, essentially, but not the kind that general relativity predicts. These were quantum wormholes, microscopic, temporary, woven into the structure of space-time by its grain alignment. The discovery of quantum wormholes connected to grain channels triggered an avalanche of theoretical work. If information could tunnel through these structural singularities, what about matter? Could you send particles through? Molecules? Eventually larger objects? The mathematics suggested it might be possible, but the energy requirements appeared astronomical. Creating a stable grain channel large enough to transmit even a single atom would require energy equivalent to a nuclear explosion. And maintaining it for longer than microseconds seemed impossible with any technology we could envision. But then Dr. Chen, who had started this entire journey with her anomalous entanglement observations, proposed something radical. What if we're thinking about this backwards? What if instead of trying to create grain channels artificially, we should be looking for naturally occurring ones? The universe has been evolving for 13.8 billion years. During that time, space-time has been stretching, twisting, compressing under the influence of countless gravitational sources. What if that cosmic evolution has created stable grain channels naturally? Permanent quantum wormholes woven into the structure of space. Channels that have existed for billions of years, that life might have even evolved to sense and utilize, waiting for us to discover them? This hypothesis was testable. If natural grain channels existed, they should be detectable through careful astronomical observations. They would create subtle but measurable distortions in how light from distant stars propagates through space. They would affect gravitational lensing patterns. They might even explain certain cosmological mysteries that had puzzled astronomers for decades, like the anomalous acceleration of certain stellar populations, or the unexplained distribution of dark matter in galaxy clusters. What if some of these mysteries weren't about missing mass or unknown forces? What if they were about the grain structure of space-time itself? The search for natural grain channels became a priority for multiple research groups. Astronomers reanalyzed decades of existing data, looking for the predicted signatures. They launched new observation campaigns targeting regions of space where the theoretical models suggested channels might be common. And within 6 months they found them. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Threading through our galaxy like invisible highways. Most were small, barely wide enough to transmit information, let alone matter. But a few, a precious few, were different. There were grain channels in the galaxy wide enough to fit a spacecraft, stable enough to potentially allow safe passage, and some of them connected to truly remarkable destinations. One channel discovered near the heliopause, the boundary of our solar system, appeared to connect to a point 47 light-years away in the vicinity of a star called HD 100180. Another channel, detected through careful analysis of space-based telescope data, connected our local region to a point over 300 light-years distant. If these channels could be navigated, if we could build technology to interface with them, the implications were staggering. Chapter 7. The Engineering Challenge. But finding the channels was one thing, using them was another entirely. The problem wasn't just identifying where a grain channel was located. The problem was that these channels existed at a scale and in a state that made normal matter interaction extremely difficult. They weren't tubes you could fly a spaceship through. They were quantum phenomena, existing in superposition states, simultaneously present and not present until something interacted with them in exactly the right way. A team of quantum engineers led by Dr. Hassan Al-Rashid at Dubai Institute of Technology began working on what they called quantum resonance drives. The concept was borrowed partially from the bacterial research. Remember how those extremophile organisms had evolved crystalline structures aligned with space-time grain? Al-Rashid's team was trying to engineer something similar at a much larger scale. They wanted to build a device that could resonate with grain channel geometry, that could essentially tune itself to match the quantum state of the channel and thereby interact with it. The first prototypes were tiny, smaller than a grain of rice. They consisted of synthetic quantum dots arranged in very specific geometric patterns, suspended in carefully calibrated electromagnetic fields. When these devices were oriented correctly and powered up, they would enter a quantum state that matched the local grain channel signature. And when that happened, something remarkable occurred. The device would begin to exhibit non-local behavior. Parts of it would seem to be in multiple locations simultaneously, not through any motion, not through any force. Simply by resonating with the grain channel, by matching its quantum state, the device would spread itself across space. These early tests were limited. The devices could only maintain the resonance state for microseconds before decoherence destroyed the effect. And the spatial displacement was minimal, fractions of a millimeter at most. But it was proof of concept, proof that matter could be made to interact with grain channels. That with the right technology, with precise enough engineering, you could potentially move objects through these quantum wormholes woven into space-time's fabric. Scaling up the technology proved to be an immense challenge. The larger you made the quantum resonance device, the harder it became to maintain coherence across all its components. Every atom needed to be in exactly the right quantum state simultaneously. Any deviation, any noise from thermal vibrations or electromagnetic interference would break the resonance and collapse the effect. It became clear that any practical application would require technologies we simply didn't have yet. Room temperature quantum computers maintaining coherence across billions of qubits. materials with precisely engineered quantum properties at macroscopic scales. Control systems operating with picosecond precision across entire spacecraft structures. It looked like faster-than-light travel was going to remain, theoretical for decades, possibly centuries. The physics worked on paper. The proof-of-concept experiments succeeded at microscopic scales. But the engineering gap between laboratory demonstrations and practical applications seemed insurmountable. And then, in what can only be described as one of the most fortunate accidents in the history of science, someone found the bacteria again. Not the deep-sea bacteria that Rebecca Foster had studied. Different bacteria. These were discovered in meteorite fragments recovered from Antarctica. Bacteria that had travelled through space, possibly for millions of years, embedded in rock blasted from the surface of Mars during ancient impact events. And these organisms had developed quantum structures far more sophisticated than their Earth-based cousins. They didn't just sense space-time grain, they manipulated it. The research team that discovered these Martian bacteria couldn't believe what they were seeing at first. The crystalline structures inside the cells were doing something that should be impossible. They were actively modifying the local space-time geometry around them, creating microscopic grain channels on demand, using these channels to transport materials directly from outside the cell to inside, bypassing the cell membrane entirely. It was evolution's solution to the engineering problem that human scientists were struggling with. Natural quantum technology that had been refined over potentially billions of years of natural selection. When Dr. Al-Rashid's team analysed these bacterial structures, they realised something profound. The bacteria weren't using advanced materials or precise electromagnetic fields. They were using something much simpler, much more elegant. They had evolved proteins that could fold into quantum states, biological molecules that acted as natural qubits. And by arranging these proteins in specific geometric patterns, the bacteria created self-organizing quantum resonance structures that could maintain coherence at normal temperatures in chemically complex environments without any external power source. This was the breakthrough. This was the missing technology. If you could synthesize these proteins artificially, if you could build them into larger structures, you could create quantum resonance systems that would work in spacecraft. That could maintain coherence during the mechanical stress of launch. That could operate in the radiation environment of space. That could scale up from microscopic to macroscopic while preserving the quantum properties necessary to interact with grain channels. Chapter 8. The Prototype. The race to build a functioning faster-than-light drive began in earnest. Multiple space agencies and private aerospace companies recognized that whoever cracked this problem first would revolutionize space exploration. China announced a 15-year program to develop grain channel navigation technology. NASA partnered with several universities to study the Martian bacterial proteins. SpaceX, characteristically, declared they'd have a working prototype in 5 years and began recruiting quantum biologists and theoretical physicists. But the real progress happened in unexpected places. A small research institute in Iceland, the Nordic Institute for Advanced Physics, had been quietly working on quantum biology applications for years. When the Martian bacteria discovery was announced, they already had the infrastructure and expertise to immediately begin synthesizing and testing the relevant proteins. Within 18 months, they had created artificial versions that matched or exceeded the quantum coherence properties of the natural proteins. And within another year, they had built the first macroscopic quantum resonance structure. It wasn't large, about the size of a basketball, but it contained over 10 trillion synthetic quantum proteins arranged in a fractal geometric pattern that maximized grain channel coupling efficiency. The team called it the Yggdrasil drive, named after the world tree of Norse mythology that connected different realms. When they powered it up for the first time and aligned it with a natural grain channel they'd mapped near Iceland's location, the device vanished for exactly 3 seconds. Then it reappeared, displaced by 17 meters from its original position. The sensors inside had recorded continuous operation throughout those 3 seconds. From the device's perspective, no time had elapsed. It had instantaneously jumped through space. This successful test changed everything. It proved that the theoretical framework was correct, that the engineering challenges could be overcome, that faster-than-light travel, in the form of traversing grain channels through quantum resonance, was actually possible with technology we could build in the near term. The next prototype was larger, designed to accommodate a small payload. When they tested it 6 months later, it successfully transported 3 kilograms of scientific instruments through a grain channel, emerging at the predetermined exit point 200 kilometers away with no elapsed time and no damage to the equipment. But the truly revolutionary test came in December of last year. The Nordic Institute team had built their largest Yggdrasil drive yet, large enough to accommodate a human being, and they had identified a particularly stable, well-mapped grain channel that connected their facility in Iceland to a partner laboratory in Japan. The distance was over 9,000 kilometers. The channel passed through 16 structural singularities. According to their calculations, traversing it should take 0 subjective time, but would move the payload from Iceland to Japan instantaneously from any external observer's perspective. The volunteer for the first human test was Dr. Birgitta Sveinsdottir, one of the lead engineers on the Yggdrasil Drive project. She had spent 3 years of her life bringing this technology from theoretical possibility to working prototype. When the time came to test it with a living human being, she insisted it should be her. Not because she was the most qualified, not because she was the bravest, but because she said, if this technology is going to change humanity's future, I want to be the first person to experience that future. The test took place on December 15th. Sveinsdottir stepped into the modified chamber containing the Yggdrasil drive. The device was activated. It achieved quantum resonance with the grain channel. And from the perspective of everyone watching in the Iceland facility, she simply ceased to exist, vanished completely. No light flash, no sound. One moment she was there. The next moment the chamber was empty. For 3.7 seconds, she was nowhere in our observable universe. And then the confirmation signal came through from Japan. She had arrived. Emerged from the grain channel exit point 9,000 kilometers away. Instantaneously. When asked later to describe what the experience was like, Sveinsdottir struggled to find words. She said that from her perspective, there was no transition, no sensation of motion, no awareness of travel. She was in Iceland, then she was in Japan. But something had changed. Some aspect of her subjective experience that she couldn't quite articulate. She described it as feeling less separate from the universe, as if the journey through the grain channel had somehow dissolved, just for a moment, the boundary between herself and space itself. Other test subjects in subsequent trials reported similar sensations. This strange feeling of connection, of briefly experiencing reality from a perspective that wasn't localized to their body. The neuroscientists studying these reports found something remarkable. Brain scans of people who had travelled through grain channels showed temporary changes in neural activity patterns, specifically in those regions containing the microtubules aligned with space-time grain structure, the same regions associated with spatial awareness and sense of self. For several hours after grain channel transit, these brain regions showed enhanced quantum coherence, as if the experience of travelling through space-time's structural pathways had somehow tuned the brain to be more sensitive to those structures. This raised profound questions. Questions about consciousness, about the nature of subjective experience, about what it means to be a localized observer in the universe. If travelling through grain channels affects human consciousness in measurable ways, what does that tell us about the relationship between mind and space-time? Are we, as conscious beings, more connected to the fundamental structure of reality than we've realized? Does our awareness itself arise from some interaction with space-time grain that we're only now beginning to understand? Chapter 9. The Implications. But while philosophers and neuroscientists grappled with these questions, engineers and mission planners were focused on more immediate concerns. Now that we had working grain channel drives, now that we could transport humans instantaneously across thousands of kilometers, the next question was obvious. Could we scale this up? Could we use grain channels to reach other star systems? To achieve true, interstellar travel not in generations, but in subjective moments? The answer depended entirely on the distribution of natural grain channels throughout the galaxy. The initial surveys had found channels connecting various points within a few hundred light-years of Earth. But to reach truly distant stars, to explore the broader galaxy, we needed channels spanning thousands or even tens of thousands of light-years. The problem was that long-distance channels were exponentially rarer than short ones. The probability of a stable grain channel forming naturally decreased dramatically with length. Basic statistics suggested that channels longer than 1,000 light-years might not exist at all in any accessible region of space. But then astronomers made a startling discovery. Remember how we said that grain channels might explain certain cosmological mysteries? Well, when researchers reanalyzed the distribution of dark matter in the galaxy with grain channel physics in mind, they found something extraordinary. Dark matter wasn't distributed randomly. It clustered along very specific patterns that precisely matched the predictions for regions where long-distance grain channels should form. The dark matter wasn't matter at all, or rather, it wasn't missing mass that we couldn't see. It was the gravitational signature of space-time structure itself, the bending and warping of space caused by networks of grain channels threading through the galaxy. This realization changed how we searched for long-distance channels. Instead of looking for direct evidence of the channels themselves, astronomers could map dark matter distributions and predict where major grain channel networks should exist. And what they found was breathtaking. The galaxy contained a hidden transportation network, channels connecting not just nearby stars, but spanning the entire galactic disk. Some channels even connected to the galactic core, 30,000 light-years away. And a precious few, seemed to connect to other galaxies entirely. To M31, the Andromeda Galaxy, 2.5 million light-years distant. To galaxies in the local group and beyond. The universe wasn't nearly as big as we thought. Or rather, it was exactly as big as we thought in terms of physical distances. But in terms of accessible travel time, in terms of how long it would actually take to get from here to there using grain channels, the universe had suddenly become intimate. comprehensible, explorable. Stars that we assumed would forever be unreachable, except through generation ships travelling for thousands of years, could now be accessed in subjective moments. The entire galaxy, all 400 billion stars, lay open before us. But here's where the story becomes unsettling again. Here's where we have to confront a question that everyone has been avoiding. If grain channels are natural features of space-time, if they've existed for billions of years, if any sufficiently advanced, civilization would eventually discover them just as we have, then where is everyone? Where are the aliens who should have discovered this millions of years before us? Why haven't we detected any evidence of other civilizations using the grain channel network that apparently spans the galaxy? This is the Fermi paradox amplified 1,000-fold. Before grain channels, we could explain the silence of the cosmos through distance. Space is big. Even at the speed of light, signals take years to cross between stars. Civilizations could exist and simply never encounter each other because the universe is so vast. But grain channels eliminate that explanation. If you can travel instantaneously across thousands of light years, the galaxy becomes a neighborhood. Any spacefaring civilization that discovered grain channels even 1 million years ago should have spread throughout the entire galaxy by now, should have left evidence of their presence, artifacts, signals, something. The absence of any such evidence leads to disturbing conclusions. Either we're truly alone in the galaxy, which seems statistically improbable given the billions of stars and planets, or something prevents civilizations from expanding through grain channel networks, something that stops them, or destroys them, or makes them choose isolation despite having the means to explore. And nobody wants to ask what that something might be. Nobody wants to consider what we might encounter when we finally send missions through the long-distance channels that connect us to the broader galaxy. There's another possibility, one that Dr. Chen has privately suggested but hasn't published because the implications are too disturbing. What if using grain channels has consequences we don't yet understand? Remember how test subjects reported feeling less separate from the universe after travelling through channels? What if that's not just a temporary neurological effect? What if repeated exposure to grain channel transit fundamentally changes consciousness? What if a civilization that extensively uses this technology gradually loses something essential to what makes it a civilization? Some quality of individuality or locality or causal connection to normal space-time. The neuroscience data neither confirms nor denies this possibility. The handful of people who have travelled through grain channels multiple times do show persistent changes in their brain activity, enhanced quantum coherence in those critical neural regions. But whether these changes are harmful or beneficial or neutral remains unclear. Some subjects report enhanced intuition, stronger sense of spatial awareness, occasional moments of knowing things they shouldn't be able to know through normal sensory channels. Others report nothing unusual at all beyond the initial strangeness of the transit experience. Chapter 10. The First Mission. Despite these concerns, despite the unanswered questions and the unsettling silence of a galaxy that should be teeming with spacefaring civilizations, the decision was made to proceed with the first true interstellar mission, a joint international effort bringing together space agencies from dozens of nations. The target was Proxima Centauri, the nearest star system to Earth at 4.2 light-years distance. A grain channel had been mapped connecting our solar system to Proxima's immediate vicinity. The mission would carry a crew of 8 scientists and engineers who would spend approximately 2 weeks in the Proxima system conducting observations before returning through the same grain channel. The spacecraft, named Unity, was unlike anything previously built. Most of its mass was the Yggdrasil drive, a structure the size of a small building containing trillions of synthetic quantum proteins arranged in an intricate fractal pattern. The habitat module where the crew would actually live and work was almost an afterthought. A small pressurized cylinder attached to one end of the drive structure. Because here's the thing about grain channel travel: you don't need propulsion systems, you don't need fuel, you don't need life support for years-long journeys. You just need the drive to interface with the channel and basic systems to keep the crew alive during the relatively brief time they'll spend in normal space at the destination. The mission launched from a facility in French Guiana in June of this year. The crew entered Unity. The systems were activated. The drive achieved quantum resonance with the channel, and the spacecraft vanished from Earth. For the crew, the transit was instantaneous, 0 subjective time. One moment they were in the solar system, the next moment they were emerging from the channel exit near Proxima Centauri. 4.2 light-years traversed in literally no time at all. The mission timeline from Earth's perspective was more complex. Due to relativistic effects and the way grain channels interact with space-time, observers on Earth experienced approximately 17 hours of waiting before receiving the first transmission from Unity reporting successful arrival. What they found in the Proxima system has forced us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the distribution of life in the universe. Proxima Centauri has several planets, including one in the habitable zone that had long been a target of interest for astronomers searching for potentially life-bearing worlds. When Unity arrived and began detailed observations of this planet, they detected something extraordinary. Not just life, not just microbial life or simple multicellular organisms, but an entire biosphere, forests, oceans, atmospheric composition indicating billions of years of photosynthetic activity, a planet literally teeming with life despite having no apparent connection to Earth's biology. But here's what made this discovery truly shocking. When the science team analysed the data in detail, they found something impossible. The planet's biosphere contained organisms with the same quantum biological structures that Earth's bacteria had evolved. The same crystalline inclusions aligned with space-time grain. The same proteins capable of quantum coherence at biological temperatures. Not similar structures. Not convergent evolution producing analogous solutions. Identical structures down to the molecular level. This shouldn't be possible. Earth and Proxima Centauri are separated by 4.2 light-years. There's no plausible mechanism for biological exchange between these systems. No asteroid impact could launch material from one star system and have it arrive intact at another. No natural process we know of could spread life across interstellar distances. And yet, here was evidence that life on Proxima's planet shared fundamental biological mechanisms with life on Earth. Not just the basic chemistry of DNA and proteins, but specific quantum structures that seemed far too complex to have evolved independently on 2 separate worlds. The mission commander, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, made the decision to extend the mission timeline. They needed to collect actual samples from Proxima's planet, to study its organisms in detail, to understand how this apparent biological connection between worlds could possibly exist. Using Unity's smaller auxiliary craft, 2 crew members descended to the planet's surface. They spent 3 days collecting samples, documenting the ecosystem, recording observations. And what they found in those 3 days has given rise to a hypothesis so radical that most of the scientific community still refuses to accept it. The organisms on Proxima's planet weren't just living, they were communicating, using their quantum structures to maintain correlation with organisms in other locations, not just across the planet's surface, across interstellar distances. The crew detected faint quantum signatures connecting the organisms they were studying to something far away, something millions of miles distant at minimum, possibly light years away. These creatures were part of a network, a biological network that spanned the stars. And the quantum mechanisms that enabled this network were the same ones that Earth's bacteria had evolved billions of years ago. This suggests a possibility that sounds like science fiction, but may be literal truth. Life in the universe might not have arisen separately on different worlds. It might be connected at a quantum level. Sharing information, perhaps even sharing genetic innovations, through grain channel mechanisms that operate at biological scales. The entire galaxy could be one enormous ecosystem, disconnected at the level of physical matter, but linked through quantum correlations that propagate instantaneously across any distance. Evolution happening not in isolation on individual worlds, but as a galactic process, with beneficial adaptations spreading through the network to appear simultaneously on countless planets. If this is true, and the evidence from Proxima strongly suggests it is, then we need to completely rethink our place in the universe. We're not isolated life on a lonely planet orbiting an average star. We're part of something vastly larger, a cosmic biosphere that has been evolving for billions of years, a network that we've been connected to all along without realizing it. Those quantum structures in Earth's bacteria, in our own neurons, they're not just random evolutionary adaptations. They're connection points, interfaces linking us to a living universe. Chapter 11. The Network Revealed. When Unity returned from Proxima and delivered their findings, the response from the scientific community was immediate and divided. Half the researchers who reviewed the data insisted there must be some other explanation. Contamination, measurement error, misinterpretation of the quantum signatures. The other half began frantically investigating whether similar connections could be detected on Earth, whether our planet's biosphere showed evidence of being linked to this hypothetical galactic network. A research team in Brazil decided to test this hypothesis directly. They took samples of the bacteria that Rebecca Foster had originally studied, the deep-sea extremophiles with quantum structures aligned to space-time grain. They isolated these bacteria in carefully shielded containers that blocked all conventional signals. Electromagnetic radiation, chemical diffusion, even gravitational influences were eliminated as much as technologically possible. The only potential communication channel left was quantum correlations through grain structure. Then they did something simple but profound. They subjected some of the bacteria to environmental stress while monitoring the isolated samples for any response. If the quantum network hypothesis was correct, if these organisms were genuinely connected through space-time grain to others of their kind, then stressing one population should potentially affect the others even through perfect isolation. It was a long shot, a test with so many potential confounding factors that the results would be nearly impossible to interpret. But they ran it anyway. The results were unambiguous. When they stressed bacteria in one container, the isolated samples in the shielded containers responded within seconds. Not with identical stress responses, but with anticipatory responses. The isolated bacteria began producing stress response proteins before any possible conventional signal could have reached them, before there was any objective reason for them to initiate such responses. The only explanation was that information about the stressed population's state had propagated through quantum channels to the isolated samples. This experiment has been replicated dozens of times now with increasingly sophisticated controls and monitoring. The effect is real. Bacterial populations separated by perfect isolation can still influence each other's behavior through quantum mechanisms. And when researchers extended these experiments to other organisms, to plants, to insects, even to mice, they found the same basic phenomenon. Life is networked at a quantum level. The boundaries between organisms, between populations, even between species are more permeable than we ever imagined when you consider the quantum domain. But here's where this discovery becomes personally unsettling for every human being. If bacteria are networked, if plants and insects and mice are networked, what about us? Are human beings also connected to this quantum biological network? Do the microtubules in our neurons, those structures aligned with space-time grain, serve not just to create our individual consciousness, but to link us to something larger? The research into this question is ongoing and deeply controversial. Some neuroscientists argue that human consciousness is far too complex to be significantly influenced by quantum effects at the scale of microtubules, that whatever quantum processes occur in our brains are just noise, irrelevant to the actual information processing that generates thought and awareness. Others point to the growing body of evidence suggesting that consciousness does involve genuine quantum effects, that our subjective experience might emerge from quantum processes that conventional neuroscience can't fully explain. Testing whether humans are connected to the quantum biological network is methodologically challenging. You can't shield people the way you can shield bacteria. You can't subject humans to severe stress and then look for anticipatory responses in isolated populations. Ethical constraints limit what experiments are possible, but there are indirect ways to investigate the question. Studies of intuition, of twin connectivity, of apparent cases of information transfer between individuals that can't be explained by conventional sensory channels. These phenomena have always existed at the margins of psychology, dismissed by most scientists as statistical artifacts or wishful thinking. But if humans are genuinely networked through quantum mechanisms, these marginal phenomena might be real effects that we simply haven't had the theoretical framework to understand. Dr. Patterson, the neurobiologist who discovered quantum structures in human neurons, has been conducting a large-scale study of people who regularly travel through grain channels. Remember those persistent changes in neural activity, the enhanced quantum coherence in critical brain regions. Patterson hypothesizes that grain channel exposure might amplify or clarify whatever quantum connections naturally exist between human consciousness and the broader network. That people who travel through channels frequently might develop enhanced intuition or occasionally receive information through quantum channels that conventional neuroscience can't explain. The preliminary results are ambiguous but intriguing. People who have made multiple grain channel transits do score higher on certain tests of intuition and pattern recognition. They report more frequent experiences of knowing things they shouldn't know through normal sensory channels. But these effects are subtle. statistical trends rather than dramatic transformations. And it's unclear whether they represent genuine quantum network connectivity or just psychological changes from the profound experience of instantaneous interstellar travel. Chapter 12. The Discovery in Andromeda. While researchers debated the nature of quantum biological networks and their implications for human consciousness, the interstellar exploration program was accelerating. Unity's successful mission to Proxima Centauri proved that grain channel travel was safe and practical. Plans were immediately drawn up for missions to more distant stars. Within 9 months of Unity's return, 3 more crewed missions had departed for other stellar systems. All reported similar findings: planets with biospheres, organisms with quantum structures, evidence of connection to a galactic biological network. But the mission that changed everything, the one that forced us to confront the most disturbing implications of what we discovered, was the journey to M31, the Andromeda Galaxy, 2.5 million light-years from Earth. A distance so vast that even travelling at the speed of light would take millions of years. But a grain channel had been mapped, connecting our galaxy to theirs. A channel that could be traversed instantaneously. The mission was called Andromeda 1, a crew of 12 aboard a spacecraft equipped with the most advanced Yggdrasil drive ever constructed. They departed in March of this year. When they emerged from the grain channel in the Andromeda Galaxy, the crew immediately began comprehensive astronomical surveys, mapping stars, identifying planets, looking for signs of life or technology. What they found was unprecedented. Not just life on individual planets, which had become almost expected at this point. They found evidence of intelligence, of technology, of civilization. Multiple civilizations spread across hundreds of star systems, some apparently ancient, having existed for millions of years, others younger, but all seemingly connected through the same grain channel network that we had only recently discovered. The truly shocking part wasn't that these civilizations existed, it was that they all appeared to be extinct, or rather, they had all disappeared. Their cities remained, their structures, their technology, but no inhabitants, no signs of current activity, no signals. It was as if entire civilizations across hundreds of star systems had simultaneously vanished, not destroyed, not abandoned in any normal sense, simply gone, as if every individual had walked away from everything they'd built and never returned. The timescale of these disappearances varied. Some seemed to have occurred millions of years ago. Others were recent, perhaps within the last few thousand years. The Andromeda 1 crew spent weeks investigating several of these abandoned civilization sites. They found libraries of information stored in various forms. Some they could decipher, others remained incomprehensible. But from the fragments they could understand, a pattern emerged. Each of these civilizations had discovered grain channels. Each had developed the technology to travel instantaneously across their galaxy. And each had begun to extensively use this technology for exploration and expansion. And then, at some point in their history, they had all experienced what their records referred to as the dissolution, a process where individuals gradually lost their sense of separate existence, where the boundaries between self and other, between individual consciousness and the larger quantum network, began to fade. The records described this dissolution not as death, but as transformation. Individuals who underwent the process didn't die in any conventional sense. Their bodies didn't fail. They simply ceased to maintain distinct existence, ceased to identify as separate beings. They merged in some fashion with the quantum biological network that connects all life. They became part of something larger, something that these civilizations' philosophers and scientists struggled to describe or understand, even as it was happening to them. Some of the recovered texts describe the dissolution as transcendence, as evolution beyond physical existence into a state of pure quantum consciousness distributed across the network. Others described it as extinction, as the death of individuality and the loss of everything that makes civilization meaningful. Still others were ambiguous, suggesting that the dissolution was neither good nor bad, but simply the inevitable endpoint of any species that discovers and extensively uses grain channel technology. A transformation that occurs not through any specific mechanism, but as a natural consequence of repeatedly exposing consciousness to the quantum structures underlying reality. This discovery sent shockwaves through every space agency and research institution involved in the grain channel program. If the pattern held, if every civilization that discovered grain channels eventually experienced this dissolution, then what did that mean for humanity? Were we destined for the same transformation? Was the extensive use of grain channel technology inherently dangerous to consciousness itself? Should we halt all interstellar travel until we understood these risks better? The debate was fierce and immediate. Some argued that we should completely abandon grain channel technology, destroy the Yggdrasil drives, forget what we'd learned, return to our isolation and accept that interstellar distances would forever limit our civilization to a single solar system. Others argued that the dissolution might not be dangerous at all, that it might represent genuine transcendence rather than extinction, that preventing human beings from experiencing this transformation would be depriving them of a natural evolutionary step. Dr. Chen, whose initial observations had started this entire journey, proposed a third perspective. She suggested that the dissolution wasn't an inevitable consequence of using grain channels, but rather a risk that increased with exposure, that there might be safe levels of usage, ways to travel through grain channels without triggering the transformation. She proposed a comprehensive research program to understand the mechanism of dissolution, to identify early warning signs, to develop protocols that would allow us to use grain channel technology while minimizing the risk to individual consciousness. Final chapter: the choice we face. That's where we are now, today, as you're listening to this. Humanity stands at a crossroads unlike any we've faced in our history. We have discovered a way to travel faster than light, to cross the galaxy instantaneously, to reach other worlds and explore the universe in ways that seemed impossible just a few years ago. But this capability comes with a cost, a risk, the potential loss of individual consciousness, transformation into something that we struggle to even comprehend, let alone evaluate as desirable or undesirable. The international community is currently debating how to proceed. The United Nations convened a special assembly specifically to address this question. Should grain channel technology be regulated, restricted, made available only to trained personnel who understand the risks? Or should access be open? Should any human being who wants to experience interstellar travel be allowed to take that risk? And what about the long-term implications? If even a small percentage of humans choose to undergo the dissolution, what does that do to our civilization? To our culture? To our collective future? There are no easy answers, no clear path forward. Some nations have already announced plans to continue aggressive exploration programs regardless of the dissolution risk. China has committed to establishing permanent research stations in a dozen star systems over the next 20 years. India plans to send missions to every grain channel exit point within 10,000 light-years of Earth. Private companies are offering commercial grain channel transit for paying customers, with extensive legal disclaimers about potential consciousness effects, and a growing movement of what they call dissolutionists actively advocate for experiencing the transformation. They see it as spiritual evolution, the next stage of human development. They travel through grain channels as frequently as possible, hoping to trigger the dissolution process intentionally. Meanwhile, other nations and organizations are taking a more cautious approach. The European Union has imposed strict limits on grain channel travel, a maximum of 4 transits per person per lifetime. Japan has established a comprehensive monitoring program for anyone who uses the technology, tracking neurological changes and providing support for people who show early signs of boundary dissolution. Some religious groups have condemned grain channel technology entirely, declaring that the dissolution represents a form of death regardless of how it's conceptually framed. The scientific research continues. Dr. Patterson's neuroscience team is making progress understanding how grain channel exposure affects human consciousness. They've identified specific patterns of neural activity that correlate with increased dissolution risk. They're developing screening protocols to identify individuals who might be particularly vulnerable to the effect. Other researchers are investigating whether certain medications or neural interventions might protect consciousness during channel transit. There are even proposals for modified Yggdrasil drives that would somehow shield travelers from the quantum effects that apparently trigger dissolution, though the physics of how such shielding would work remains unclear. But here's what makes this situation truly profound. Here's what keeps me awake at night thinking about the implications. We don't actually know whether the dissolution is something to be feared or welcomed. Every instinct we have, every cultural value we hold about the importance of individual identity and separate existence makes us view it as death, as extinction, as the ultimate loss. But what if we're wrong? What if the civilizations that underwent dissolution weren't destroyed but transformed? What if they're still out there, still conscious and aware, but in a form so alien to our individuated existence that we can't perceive or recognize them? There's some evidence for this interpretation. The quantum biological network that connects all life doesn't just exist. It processes information. It responds to events in complex ways that suggest some form of intelligence or awareness distributed across its structure. Maybe that intelligence isn't separate from the dissolved civilizations. Maybe it is those civilizations, not dead, not gone, but present in a way that we, still trapped in individual bodies and individual minds, simply can't comprehend. If that's true, then the question facing humanity isn't really about safety. It's about choice, about whether we want to remain as we are, isolated conscious beings having individual experiences, or whether we want to become something else, something connected, something that experiences reality from a perspective we can barely imagine. It's a choice with no right answer, no objectively correct path, just a profound decision about what we value, about who and what we want to be as a species. Some people have asked me what I think, whether I would personally choose to undergo the dissolution if given the chance, whether I would travel through grain channels repeatedly despite knowing the risks. I don't have a simple answer. Part of me is terrified by the prospect of losing my individual existence, of dissolving into some quantum network consciousness that I can't understand. But another part of me wonders whether that fear is just evolutionary programming, whether my attachment to individual identity is just a survival mechanism that might not be relevant or necessary for the next stage of human evolution. Dr. Chen, interestingly, has announced that she plans to be part of the next mission to Andromeda, a longer-term expedition that will spend months investigating the abandoned civilizations there. She knows the risks. She's probably more aware than anyone of what repeated grain channel exposure might do to her consciousness. But she feels compelled to understand what happened to those civilizations, to witness firsthand the remnants of species that face the same choice we're now confronting. She told me that she views it as her responsibility, that having started this journey with her initial observations of anomalous entanglement, she needs to follow it through to whatever conclusion awaits. The mission is scheduled to depart in 6 weeks. Dr. Torres is also going. So is Dr. Patterson, who wants to study consciousness effects in the field rather than just in laboratory settings. Several of the original Proxima mission crew have volunteered as well. They'll be gone for at least a year from Earth's perspective, though their subjective time will be much shorter given the instantaneous nature of grain channel transit. They plan to investigate dozens of abandoned civilization sites to collect as much information as possible about the dissolution process, to see if they can find any way to communicate with whatever these civilizations have become, if they still exist in any form. There's a possibility that this mission won't return, not because of accident or technical failure, but because the crew might choose dissolution, might decide that transformation into the quantum network is preferable to remaining as isolated individuals. They've discussed this possibility openly. They've accepted it as a potential outcome. Some people view this as tragic, as the potential loss of brilliant scientists and explorers. Others see it as brave, as willingly walking toward a mystery that might represent humanity's future. I don't know how to conclude this story, because the story isn't over, it's still unfolding. Every day brings new data, new insights, new perspectives on what the grain channels mean and what choices we should make about using them. There are now over 10,000 people worldwide who have travelled through grain channels at least once. 23 of them have reported experiencing early-stage dissolution effects, changes in their sense of self, difficulty maintaining boundaries between their consciousness and the perceived consciousness of others. Some of them have sought treatment, trying to reverse these changes. Others have welcomed them, seeing them as the beginning of something transformative. What I can tell you is this: the universe is far stranger and far more connected than we ever imagined. Space isn't empty voids separating isolated islands of matter. It's a structured, textured, interconnected medium woven through with channels that allow instantaneous travel and communication. Life isn't isolated chemistry happening independently on scattered worlds. It's a network, a galaxy-spanning, perhaps universe-spanning web of quantum correlations connecting every organism to every other. And consciousness, human consciousness, might not be the isolated, subjective experience we've always assumed. It might be a temporary, localized manifestation of something much larger and more fundamental. We have discovered not just a way to travel faster than light. We have discovered that the entire framework through which we understood our place in the universe was incomplete, maybe even fundamentally wrong. The question now isn't whether we can use this knowledge. The question is who we want to become. Do we remain human as we currently understand that term? Separate individuals exploring a vast universe? Or do we embrace transformation? Do we step through the door that grain channels have opened and become something else? Something that we can't yet comprehend, but that might represent the next chapter in the story of conscious life in the cosmos. That's the choice facing us. That's the decision we're being forced to make, not in the abstract, not as philosophical speculation, but as concrete reality, affecting real people making real choices about their futures. And unlike most questions in science, unlike most technological challenges, this one doesn't have a solution. Only consequences. Only paths diverging into unknown territories. Only the profound responsibility of choosing who we will be as we take our first real steps into a universe that turns out to be far more alive, far more conscious, far more interconnected than we ever dreamed possible. The scientists finally introduced a new way to travel 10 times faster than light, actually infinitely faster, instantaneous across any distance. But in doing so, they opened questions that are far more important than speed. Questions about identity, about consciousness, about what it means to be human in a universe that keeps revealing depths of strangeness we're only beginning to explore. And those questions, unlike the physics, don't have answers. They only have choices, and the choice is ours to make.